The November morning in New York was chilly, but inside the Aura Tech Tower the air was even colder. Julian Stone at 45 was an icon in the tech world. The entire world knew him through his captivating speeches, billion-dollar deals, and the ruthlessness that defined his presence in business. His office on the top floor with glass windows from floor to ceiling, offering a panoramic view of the city, reflected the man Julian had meticulously built solid, untouchable. But this morning that impenetrable wall was cracking. Julian wasn't sitting behind his mahogany desk, nor was he gazing out at the horizon, veiled in early morning mist. Instead, he stood before a picture frame where a little girl with shiny golden hair was smiling brightly, her blue eyes sparkling like tiny stars. That smile now was nothing but a memory. 2 years since the failed kidnapping, and Lily Stone's voice had completely disappeared. The best doctors, top therapists, all called it selective mutism due to psychological trauma. Julian had tried everything: music therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, even buying a small pony to keep her company. He had spent millions, yet the result remained silence. Every time he saw his daughter, a heavy feeling of guilt weighed down on his chest. He, the man who could run an empire worth billions, was powerless in the face of his own daughter's pain. Julian absent-mindedly adjusted his tie. It was an unconscious habit, a repetitive motion to maintain control, even if only over his appearance. He remembered the words of Lily's psychologist: "Julian, money is not the key to unlocking your daughter's heart. Your presence is what matters." Those words cut through him like a knife. Presence. For the past 2 years he had been so consumed with building a wall of money to hide his own helplessness that he forgot what Lily needed the most was simply his presence. Today he had cancelled an important shareholder meeting, a decision he had never made before. His heart raced, not from the pressure of work, but from a new fear, the fear that he might ruin this day. He picked up his phone, and the screen lit up with hundreds of unread emails. He wanted to scroll through them, to drown in the safety of numbers and contracts. But then he looked down, his eyes locking with Lily's. Lily Stone, 5 years old, was sitting alone on a swing in the park. She clutched her old stuffed bunny, named Bubbles, her first birthday gift. Her golden hair fluttered in the breeze, but her face remained eerily still. She wasn't swinging, she just sat there, her feet lightly touching the ground. Her world now was reduced to a small square of sand, where she traced aimless circles with her finger. Julian sat down on a bench not far from her. He stole a glance at Lily. He could still hear her laughter from before, her voice calling out, "Daddy," every time he came home. Now all of that had become an obsession. He opened his phone screen and scrolled through financial news. He wanted to prove to himself that he was still Julian Stone, the CEO of Aura Tech, the one who could control everything. But a bird's sudden song made Lily look up. Her eyes flickered with a hint of emotion before quickly fading into emptiness. "She can't speak, can she?" A warm voice came from behind Julian. He flinched quickly, hiding his phone. A black woman stood there, dressed in an old denim jacket and a bright red scarf. Her eyes had an unusual warmth, not pity, but understanding. Julian felt uncomfortable. He had become accustomed to people looking at his daughter with caution, or pity offering hollow advice. He stood up, adjusting his shirt collar, trying to regain his usual cold demeanor. "She has selective mutism, psychological trauma. We've worked with the best experts." His voice was more defensive than he expected. He wanted to add that he had enough money to buy every type of therapy in the world, but her words interrupted him. "I'm not asking what the doctors said," she said softly. "I'm asking if she can speak." Julian blinked. He wasn't used to someone being so direct, especially a stranger in a public place. He hesitated, feeling exposed, as if his safe shell had been stripped away. "You have no right to ask that." Julian stepped forward, standing between her and Lily. "I want you to keep your distance." Her expression didn't change. She still looked at him with those warm eyes, as if she could see the deep hurt inside him. "What do you see, Julian?" Lily's psychologist had once asked him that. "You see Lily, a hurt little girl. But other children, they see a friend, someone to play with." Now Julian realized he had made the same mistake. He saw a stranger a threat. He didn't see the understanding. "I'm sorry," Julian began, but an unexpected action from the woman silenced him. The woman Ava raised her finger to her lips and whistled a short melodic tune. It was a lullaby, gentle and haunting, like a whisper from another world. Julian froze as if time had stopped. That tune, he recognized it. It was the lullaby Sarah, his wife, used to sing to Lily. It was also the tune a witness had heard the night Lily almost got kidnapped, sung by an unknown woman who had held Lily until the police arrived. Everything Julian had tried to bury for the past 2 years, the pain, the helplessness, and the memory of that mysterious woman suddenly resurfaced. Julian trembled, his eyes wide in shock. He wasn't mistaken. Ava was that woman. And then a miracle happened. Lily looked up, her big eyes locked on Ava's. Her lips parted, and then a clear, high-pitched sound rang out in the stillness of the park. Laughter. A full, bright laugh, not forced, but pure, like the chime of silver bells on an autumn afternoon. Julian felt his knees give way as if gravity had vanished. He collapsed, covering his mouth with his hands, unable to believe his eyes. "It's okay now," Sophia whispered with a chuckle. Then she pointed to a small dog running by. Dog, tree, moon. Julian knelt, holding his face, his shoulders shaking. He wasn't just shocked, he was completely broken. Ava sat silently, her hand still near Lily. "It never went away," she said softly. "She just needed a reminder that her voice is still there." Julian looked up, his eyes blurry with tears. "Who are you?" he asked. Ava smiled and extended her hand. "Ava Johnson. I work with children with special needs. This little girl just needed someone to talk to her like a normal person, not someone damaged." Julian didn't take her hand right away. He was too busy staring at her face, trying to piece together fragments of memory. His gaze stopped at her wrist as she pushed a lock of hair behind her ear. The scar, long and faint, but unmistakable. Julian remembered it, the detail he had read in the police report. "You," he began, but couldn't finish the sentence. Sophia had returned to her world, her tiny fingers happily playing with the sand, as if talking was just a game she had mastered long ago. And Julian, for the first time in 2 years, didn't feel just like a CEO. He felt like a father, and today he had found hope. Ava's melody wasn't magic, but it was close enough. It wasn't a spell, but a key gently turning the rusty lock on Lily's heart. Julian, a man familiar with algorithms and data, was now witnessing something entirely illogical. His daughter Lily was laughing. Her laughter wasn't just a sound. It was a forgotten symphony. At first, it was only a soft chuckle like a babbling brook. Then it erupted into a clear, high-pitched laugh like the ringing of wind chimes in a quiet afternoon. Lily's eyes, which had been clouded in grey for 2 years, now sparkled like tiny stars. She pointed at a squirrel hanging from a tree branch. Squirrel fluffy tail, Julian collapsed onto his knees, the cold sand biting through him. He had experienced many emotions triumph when sealing a big deal, disappointment when a project failed. But this was completely different. It was liberation, a narcotic that dissolved his paralysis. His hands trembled, covering his mouth to stifle a sob. He wasn't just shocked, he was completely broken. The pain, the torment, and the hope he had buried deep inside him were now spilling out like a dam that had burst. Ava sat beside Lily, not looking at Julian, giving him space. She understood that this moment wasn't for her. Gently, she stroked Lily's hair. "Do you remember that song?" Sweetie Ava asked, her voice warm like a soft woolen blanket. Lily nodded, her face glowing. She began drawing shapes in the sand, but not the meaningless circles of before. Now they were shapes of dogs, cats. "It's safe now," she repeated, as if affirming it to herself. Julian felt as if every nerve in his body was being reconnected. Lily's voice wasn't just a sound. It was the whisper of healing beginning. Julian slowly looked up, his eyes fixed on Ava. He no longer saw just a black woman, but an angel. He saw understanding and compassion in her eyes, something even the best therapists couldn't offer. He wanted to ask her 1,000 questions, but all he could say was one word. "You." Ava smiled. She gently pushed a lock of hair behind her ear, revealing a faint scar on her wrist. That scar Julian had read about in the report was the injury the woman had sustained while resisting the kidnappers. Now that scar wasn't just a detail in a file. It was a living testament to bravery. "Ava Johnson," she said. "I'm a teacher, and this is my daughter." The little girl giggled and pointed at the stuffed bunny. "Her name is Bubbles." Julian felt small and lost. He had once thought of himself as the hero of this story, the one who would save his daughter with money and power. But it turned out the hero was a single mother who used her heart to do what all his wealth could not. Ava stood up, brushing the sand off her jeans. "I'm not trying to teach you how to be a father, Julian," she said, her voice still soft. "I just saw a little girl who needed healing." Julian remained dazed. He couldn't take his eyes off Lily, who was happily talking to the squirrel. "Can I buy you a coffee?" Julian asked, his voice hoarse. "Is this your way of thanking me or your way of investigating me?" Ava chuckled softly. Julian smiled weakly. "Maybe both." "All right," Ava said, "but there's one condition. No talking like a lawyer. Just talk like normal people." Julian nodded, and for the first time in a very long time he felt a fragile glimmer of hope. Lily, his daughter, had found her voice again. And he, Julian Stone, had found his way to becoming a real father. They walked to a cozy little cafe. The smell of coffee and pastries filled the air, creating an environment that was the complete opposite of Julian's cold office. He ordered a black coffee. Ava ordered hot chocolate. Both sat by the window, Julian glancing outside repeatedly, making sure he could still see Lily through the glass. She was talking to a dog, pointing and laughing softly. As Ava stirred her hot chocolate, Julian once again saw the scar on her wrist. This time he didn't shy away. He looked at it with respect. He had once been a man who only cared about the result, not the process. But Ava had taught him that the process, the scars, the whispers, were what mattered most. He decided to do something for her, something not to repay her, but to express his gratitude. The next day, without a word, Julian called his personal assistant. He arranged a scholarship fund worth millions for Liam Ava's son, ensuring the boy's future without the burden of financial worry. Julian knew that favors like these couldn't be repaid with words, but with actions. In the cafe, Ava continued her story. "Julian," she said, "I wasn't planning to come to the park today. I had a lot to do, but something just urged me to take a detour." Julian listened quietly. He looked at her, a woman much younger than him, yet with a remarkable maturity and experience. He realized that Ava wasn't just a kind woman, but someone with deep compassion. She didn't do this for money or fame, but because of her heart. "Do you believe in destiny?" Julian suddenly asked, his voice low. "That some people are meant to meet not by chance?" Ava sipped her hot chocolate. "I believe that some moments are too strong to be mere coincidences. Your daughter didn't speak to me because of magic. She spoke to me because she felt safe. That's human instinct. And that's something, Julian, you never gave her in the last 2 years." Julian nodded. For the first time in 2 years, he felt hope wasn't a lie. He looked at Ava, his gaze serious. "Will you spend more time with Lily?" Ava leaned back. "Julian, I'm not a psychologist. I don't have a degree. I don't need a degree," Julian said. "I need someone who sees her." Ava was silent for a moment, then smiled gently. "I'll think about it." They finished their drinks in silence, watching Lily through the window. Lily was drawing circles in the sand, but this time those circles weren't meaningless. They were filled with joy and hope. Julian felt a small crack in his impenetrable wall, and through it light was beginning to shine. The small cafe was an entirely different world compared to the places Julian Stone usually frequented. There were no flashy LED lights, no reports from the trading floor, just the faint aroma of freshly ground coffee, the mellow sounds of jazz music and worn-out leather sofas. This wasn't a place where Julian felt comfortable, but for the first time in a long while, he felt at ease. He sat across from Ava, watching her sip from her hot chocolate. His gaze was no longer filled with suspicion or defensiveness, but curiosity. He wanted to understand this woman, the one who, with just a melody, had accomplished what his entire empire could not. I want to do something for you." Julian began, his voice still slightly hesitant. "A scholarship fund for your son, or whatever you need." Ava placed her cup down and looked at Julian. Her gaze remained warm, but there was a hint of determination. "Julian," she said, "I don't do this for money, and I don't want you to feel indebted." Her refusal left Julian confused. He was so used to people accepting his offers without hesitation. He could buy anything he wanted, from expensive penthouses to million-dollar artworks. But Ava, she was an exception. "This isn't a debt," Julian said, his voice firm. "It's gratitude. You've given my daughter back her voice. I owe you something far greater than money." "You owe your daughter," Ava said bluntly, her eyes unwavering. "You owe her a father, not a boss. Julian, you've spent 2 years building a wall of money, and all it's done is make Lily more lonely. She needs your presence, your warmth. That's something no bank or investment fund can buy." Her words struck Julian like a knife to the heart. He felt exposed, vulnerable. He who had always believed in control was now laid bare by a stranger. He fell silent, staring at the faint scar on Ava's wrist. It wasn't just a scar, it was a story, a reminder of what she had to endure. "That scar," Julian whispered, pointing to her wrist. Ava smiled softly. It's a long story, but it taught me one thing. Scars aren't meant to be hidden. They remind us of the battles we've survived. Why did you disappear after that night? Julian asked, his voice low, filled with sincerity. I didn't want to become a headline, Ava said. I've been through that. After the incident when I was 18, I was hounded by reporters. They twisted my story, made me out to be someone seeking fame. I just wanted to help a child, that's all. And I thought being a billionaire you'd know a better way to handle things than I did. Julian felt shame rising within him. He had trusted his security team too much and never bothered to learn about the woman who saved his daughter. He had unknowingly left her to face rumors, to bear society's suspicions alone. I'm sorry, Julian said for the first time in his life, feeling the need to apologize to someone not from his world. I wasn't thoughtful enough. Ava smiled gently. None of us are perfect. What matters is that we learn from our mistakes. Their conversation was no longer an interrogation, but a heartfelt exchange. Julian spoke about the emptiness in his life after losing his wife, the guilt of not being able to protect Lily. Ava talked about her own unfinished dreams, her journey to becoming a single mother, and how she found joy in helping other children. When their conversation ended, Julian felt a weight lift off his chest. He no longer felt like a powerless man. Ava had given him an invaluable gift, hope, and a path to healing. The next day, Julian didn't speak a word to Ava. Instead, he called his financial manager asking to set up a scholarship fund worth $5 million named after a fairy tale character that Lily loved. The fund would cover all of Liam's tuition from preschool to university. Everything was done in secret with no public announcement. Julian knew that favors like these couldn't be repaid with money, but at least it could be an apology, a promise that from now on he would be there to protect those he loved. The next day, Julian returned to the park. He wasn't wearing a suit, didn't have his phone, just a simple man, a father. He sat on the bench watching Lily play with Ava. Lily laughed and chatted endlessly, and Julian felt a warmth spread through his chest. His daughter's laughter was no longer a memory, but a vibrant symphony. He looked at Ava, who was patiently listening to Lily, and he realized that the most priceless contract he had ever signed wasn't with any major corporation, but with this woman. A contract of trust, courage, and healing. After the afternoons spent in the park, Julian and Ava began to form an unusual bond woven together by trust and gratitude. No longer just coffee shop meetings, their encounters became simpler and more intimate, where they would watch Lily and Ava's son Liam play together. Liam was a mischievous, energetic boy, the complete opposite of the quiet Lily from before. He had become Lily's companion, building sandcastles and telling stories about dinosaurs. Julian was surprised to see his daughter laugh more, speak more. Lily even began calling him Daddy in a clear, affectionate voice. But that peaceful life didn't last. One evening, as Julian sat in his office watching Lily engrossed in her book on the sofa, his phone rang. The screen displayed a familiar name, Rachel Levine, his personal lawyer. Julian, Rachel's voice was serious. I've received some unsettling news. It seems Ava is in trouble. A cold chill ran down Julian's spine. What's going on? A former police officer has contacted her, Rachel said. His name is Sergeant Miller. He was in charge of Ava's case when she was 18. He's trying to reopen old wounds, insinuating that Ava was involved in child abductions that her presence in both cases was too perfect to be a coincidence. Julian gripped the phone tightly. "I thought this was over." "It's never over when someone wants to stir it up again," Rachel replied. "Miller was once investigated for corruption, but the case was dropped due to lack of evidence. He has a long history of being involved in shady dealings. This isn't a typical investigation, Julian. This is a personal attack." Fear and anger surged in Julian's chest. He had promised Ava that he would protect her. He had promised Lily that he would protect her voice, and now a shadow from the past was threatening all of it. "Do whatever it takes to protect her," Julian commanded. "I want to know everything about Miller, everything." Rachel promised she would do everything she could. Julian ended the call, his eyes turning toward Lily, who had dozed off on the sofa. She had found peace, and he wouldn't let anyone take it from her again. Julian decided not to tell Ava about Miller right away. He wanted to thoroughly investigate before dragging her into another battle. He spent the entire night going through old reports, digging for every small detail about the abduction case when Ava was 18. He discovered that the case file was incomplete with many contradictions. The next day, Julian met Ava in the park. Her usual peaceful expression was gone. Her eyes were slightly darkened and she kept glancing around nervously. Julian knew something was wrong. "Ava," he asked gently, "is everything okay?" Ava hesitated. "Someone from my past contacted me," she said, her voice trembling. "A former police officer. He said I was a troublemaker, that I had a pattern of helping children in danger. He said I wasn't a hero." Julian squeezed her hand. "Don't listen to him. He's trying to manipulate you."
Julian. Ava looked up at him. "When I was 18, no one believed me. The police suspected I staged everything to become famous. I had to drop out of school, leave everything behind, and run from the rumors. I don't want that for Lily." Her fear pierced Julian's heart. He realized that for Ava, this wasn't just a legal battle, it was a fight for her honor, for the truth she had been protecting for years. "No one will hurt you again," Julian said, his voice filled with resolve. "I won't let anyone do that." Julian went home and immediately called Phil, the head of his security team. He instructed Phil to gather all information about Miller, including bank accounts, places he frequented, and any connections he had. Julian didn't trust the regular legal system. He trusted his own power, his ability to uncover the truth himself.
Meanwhile, on tabloid media, a shocking article was published with the headline, "Heroine or Opportunist? The Mysterious Relationship Between the Black Woman and Billionaire Julian Stone." The article cast doubts on their relationship, implying that Ava was using Julian for financial gain. The infamous reporter Blake Tennyson, who had distorted Ava's story in the past, was behind the article. Ava saw the article, and her heart shattered once again. She had tried to escape the spotlight for so many years, but now it was coming after her. She felt powerless. She didn't want to fight. She just wanted Lily to be safe. Julian read the article and rage flared within him. He was used to the media scrutinizing him. But this time, they weren't just attacking him, they were attacking Ava, the woman who had saved his daughter. He decided he wouldn't stay silent any longer. Julian and Ava met at a small cafe. Julian showed Ava the article. She remained silent, staring at the malicious words on the page. "I'm going to hold a press conference," Julian said, his voice full of determination. "We'll tell the whole story, the truth, no secrets, nothing to fear." "Julian, I don't want to," Ava said, her voice weak. "You don't understand. They'll dig up everything about me, about my son, about my past." "I understand," Julian said, taking her hand. But silence isn't safety. Silence just lets them win. Ava, your voice brought Lily back. Now let that voice protect you. Ava looked at Julian. His eyes no longer held the arrogance of a billionaire, but the sincerity of a man who had changed. She knew he wasn't doing this for himself, but for her and for Lily. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay," she said. "Let's fight, but on my terms." As Julian and Ava prepared for the press conference, a shadow watched them from afar. Miller received information from Blake Tennyson, and a sinister smile spread across his face. He knew Julian had begun his investigation, and he knew this battle wouldn't end with mere rumors. He was ready for a direct confrontation, a battle he was certain he would win. Deciding to confront Miller was not only an act of courage, but also a journey back in time to the place where Ava's first wound had been inflicted. Brooklyn East Flatbush. For Ava, this wasn't just a location, it was a deep scar in her soul, a scar of the city. They drove to the neighborhood one late afternoon as the golden light of the setting sun bathed the old brick walls. Julian, dressed in a simple coat and jeans, felt out of place. He was used to the marble streets of Manhattan, not the cracked sidewalks and graffiti-covered walls. He glanced at Ava, who was driving. She was silent, her eyes fixed on the streets, the corner grocery stores, as though she were trying to recall something. "Are you okay?" Julian asked, his voice full of concern. "I don't know," Ava whispered. "I've tried to bury this place for 10 years. I thought I would never come back, but I know the key to solving everything is here." They got out of the car and started walking. Ava led the way, each step heavy with hesitation and pain. She stopped in front of an old laundromat, now closed. "This is where he parked the truck," Ava said, her voice trembling. "A white truck, no license plate." Julian stood silently listening. He could feel a shift in Ava. She was no longer the calm woman in the park, but a warrior ready to face her fears. They ventured deeper into a narrow alley where the kidnapping had occurred. "I was on my way to work. I heard the screams and I just ran," Ava said, her voice speeding up. "I threw a stone. It hit him and he let the child go." Julian scanned the surroundings, trying to visualize the scene. "What happened next?" "He took a knife and slashed my hand," Ava said, her voice shaking. "Then he ran. I thought I had forgotten everything, but it's all still here in my memory." They stopped in front of an old metal trash bin. "He ran through here," Ava said. "He bumped into the corner of the trash bin." She pointed to a faint mark on the bin. "At that moment I saw a streak of blood and a stain." Julian looked at the stain. It had faded with time, but he could still make out a strange shape. He took a photo. "We need the tech team. They can analyze this." As Julian contacted Phil, Ava crouched down, holding her face in her hands. "Julian, I'm scared. I'm scared I won't find anything. I'm scared I was wrong. And I'm scared they'll hurt other children again." Julian sat beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You're not alone," he said. "We'll find the truth together." Julian's sincerity eased Ava's fear. She looked at him, the man who had changed so much. He was no longer a man who only gave orders, but one who listened, who shared. She had trusted him, and that was something she had never dared to do with anyone else. Phil had sent a team of investigators to East Flatbush. They worked quietly, using the most advanced technologies to analyze the stain on the trash bin and other traces in the alley. A few hours later, Phil called Julian. "We found some fibers and a blood stain," Phil said. "We're analyzing the DNA, but there's more footprints. These footprints match the ones we found at the scene of Lily's kidnapping. Julian and Ava exchanged glances. They were right. 2 cases 20 years apart, but with the same perpetrator. "This shadow isn't a coincidence," Julian said. "He's been following you, Ava." "But why?" Ava asked, her voice trembling. "I have no money, I have no power. Why me?" Julian thought for a moment. He remembered the reports about Miller, about his gang. Miller wasn't just a human trafficker. He was a manipulator. He preyed on weak children, those abandoned by the system. He turned them into puppets for his own agenda. "Miller isn't after money," Julian said. "He's after trust. He wants to prove that the legal system can't protect us. He used to be a cop. He knows every weakness of the system. And you, Ava, with your courage, have become his greatest threat." Ava felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She had fought for 10 years to protect herself, but never expected that her enemy would still be lurking in the shadows. She looked at Julian, who stood beside her, strong and resolute. She wasn't alone anymore. "So what do we do now?" Ava asked, her voice filled with determination. "We won't run anymore," Julian said. "We'll find him, and we'll end this." Julian and Ava returned home, but they couldn't sleep. They spent the night making plans. Julian contacted Phil, asking him to gather every detail about Miller, including his connections to underground gangs and any suspicious financial transactions. They needed to know everything about Miller, their enemy. Meanwhile, somewhere in the city, Miller received a call.
"They've gone back to the alley," a voice whispered. Miller smirked maliciously. "Good," he said. "Let the game begin." He wasn't scared. He had anticipated this move. He wanted Julian and Ava to come. He wanted them to walk right into the trap he had set. He wanted them to know that he wasn't just a human trafficker, but someone who could manipulate even a billionaire CEO. He believed that in this game, he would be the one to win.
Syracuse, New York. To Julian, this city was just a name on the map, home to a semiconductor plant he had almost acquired. But to Ava, it was an echo from the past, the final clue. He called from a 315 number. He said he was building something, well, Miller's sister had said. Julian and Ava flew to Syracuse on his private jet, the luxury cabin, a stark contrast to the danger awaiting them. No bodyguards, no assistants, just Julian, Ava, and a reckless decision. Julian looked at Ava. She was no longer the frightened woman in the park. Her eyes now burned with fire, a determination buried for too long. Phil, the head of Julian's security team, had pinpointed a suspicious location, a remote complex called The Mill, a rehabilitation camp on the outskirts of Otsego. It wasn't listed in any government registry, and it appeared to be heavily guarded. They drove through winding roads past dense pine forests. The city gradually faded behind them, replaced by isolation and shadows hiding in the trees. After 2 hours, the car came to a stop. Julian and Ava got out and started walking. Even though Phil had sent a surveillance team, Julian still felt an odd unease. "We'll walk from here," Julian said, his voice lowering with caution. They walked for about 40 minutes before they saw it. A cluster of warehouses hidden behind trees, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The largest building, an old paper mill, had a faint glow of light sneaking through its windows. It looked like a fortress of secrets. They hid behind a mound of earth and watched. "Look at those guards," Ava whispered. "Uniforms, earpieces. This isn't just a cult. This is an organization." Julian nodded. He took out a small drone, a covert surveillance device. Within minutes, the screen displayed images from inside the complex. What they saw made their blood run cold. Dozens of teenagers and young adults were moving through military drills, some practicing combat, others engaging in psychological exercises. Miller's voice boomed through loudspeakers, speaking about justice outside the law, about how the system had failed. He had used these kids' frustrations to turn them into puppets. "He's saying he's a hero," Ava whispered, her voice choking. Julian zoomed in. Miller, with his graying hair and neatly trimmed beard, stood before the crowd. But the eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were unmistakable. Ava had seen them years ago. "He's not hiding," Julian whispered. "He's leading." Ava sat down, leaning against a tree. "He thinks he's saving them," she said, "but he's just brainwashing them." Julian held up his phone. "We need to call the FBI. Everyone." Ava grabbed his hand. "Wait, he'll run. And the kids, they'll scatter. We need undeniable evidence." Julian looked at her, a crazy thought flashing through his mind. "We'll go in. Get the evidence. Names, photos, anything no one can deny." Julian knew it was a crazy idea. He had everything to lose, but he also knew that Ava, the woman who had taught him about courage, would never back down. They found a gap in the fence. It led to an old maintenance tunnel. They crawled inside, flashlights illuminating their path. With each step, they went deeper into a forgotten world. Symbols similar to the Black Crown insignia were faintly drawn on the walls. At one point, Julian pointed to a poster on the wall, a drawing of people laughing with the words, "He saved us," written beneath. Ava shivered. They found Miller's office. Inside, old files, photographs and notebooks were scattered across the desk. Julian began taking pictures. Ava opened a drawer and froze. A file labeled Flatbush Case 2008. Her hand trembled as she opened it. Her teenage face stared back at her from a copy of an old police report. Her testimony, the sketch she had drawn of the attacker. And at the bottom, written in red ink, "Unreliable witness, needs further surveillance." Her breath caught. They've been watching me from the beginning," she whispered. "They marked me." Julian looked over her shoulder. "They never forgot you." Suddenly a voice rang out from the hallway. "Is anyone in here?" a gruff voice called. Julian grabbed Ava's hand. "Let's go." They ran toward the exit, but it was too late. Two guards in full uniform appeared. Julian stepped forward, shielding Ava. But before any words could be spoken, a figure stepped out from behind them. Victor Mendes, the real name of Sergeant Miller. "Well," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "Look who's come home." Ava stood tall, her body trembling, but her voice was firm. "I'm not afraid of you," Miller smiled. "You should be." "This game ends here," Julian said, his voice challenging. "Oh, I don't think so," Miller replied. "You think exposing me will destroy me. The system failed these kids. I gave them a purpose." "You turned them into slaves," Ava said. "I saved them," he retorted. "And now you've delivered yourselves to me." But before he could issue any orders, a sharp whistle pierced the air, 2 short blasts. Julian's whistle. Outside the complex, red lights flashed. The sound of helicopters buzzed overhead. Through cracks in the walls, Ava saw the FBI logo. Julian smiled. "I called an hour ago, just in case you decided to make a speech." Miller's face twisted in fury. The guards hesitated. His fortress was no longer safe. Ava looked back at him one last time. "You've lost." And with that, the fortress built on fear began to crumble. The helicopter roared overhead, its searchlights sweeping across the compound, turning it into a stage of chaos and liberation. The rapid footsteps of FBI agents, the cold clink of handcuffs, the shouts of Miller, and the eerie silence of the rescued children all blended together. Julian and Ava, hidden behind a pile of scrap, watched the scene unfold as if it were a movie. But this was no fiction. This was the bitter reality they had faced. As things gradually settled, Julian and Ava stepped out. An FBI agent approached, his gaze serious. "Mr. Julian Stone, Ms. Ava Johnson, we've received your information. Thank you for your cooperation." Julian nodded, but his eyes never left Ava. She was trembling, not out of fear, but from the powerful wave of emotions flooding her. She watched the children, their empty eyes being led out by the agents. She saw the loneliness she had once experienced. "I'm okay," Ava said when Julian touched her shoulder. I see them. I see myself in them." After giving their initial statements, Julian and Ava were taken to a safe area. They sat in an SUV looking out the window. Miller, handcuffed, was being led to another car. He looked up, his eyes meeting Ava's. It wasn't hatred, but acceptance. He nodded, as though acknowledging a defeat. Ava felt an unexpected sense of relief. The battle was over, but Julian knew this was just the beginning. "We did it," Julian said, his voice filled with pride. "We did," Ava repeated, but she looked at the children being led onto a bus. "But them? What will they do now? Where will they go?" Julian took Ava's hand. "We'll help them, all of them. This isn't a victory. It's a beginning." Julian kept his promise. In the weeks that followed, he and Ava dedicated their time to working with law enforcement and non-profit organizations. Julian established a special fund, the New Hope Fund, to sponsor the healing and reintegration of trafficked children. He used his network to find the best therapists, the finest psychologists, people who could help these children find their own voices again. Ava became Julian's companion on this journey. She visited each child, speaking with them not as a stranger, but as a friend, someone who had endured similar pain. She shared her story with them about fear, loneliness, and how she had found her voice. One afternoon, Ava sat with a girl named Chloe who had been silent for weeks. Ava gave her a drawing notebook and a box of colored pencils. The girl didn't draw anything. Ava didn't either. She simply sat there in silence. She knew that healing couldn't be rushed. After a while, Chloe picked up a purple pencil and began drawing a circle. Ava smiled, remembering Lily drawing aimless circles in the sand. But Chloe's circle was different. It had curves, shapes like leaves. And then the girl began drawing flowers, butterflies. Ava smiled. "You draw beautifully." Chloe looked up, her eyes regaining life for the first time. She pointed at the circle. "Heart," she whispered. Ava felt a tear fall. Chloe had found her voice. She had begun to heal. Julian was there, quietly observing. He had once believed that money could solve everything, but Ava had taught him that compassion and patience were the most powerful medicine. He saw the difference Ava had made in these children's lives, and he felt an immense pride. A few days later, Julian and Ava held a small ceremony at the community center in Harlem. They invited all the rescued children along with their families and the people who had helped them. The center's walls were decorated with paintings, the children's artwork. There were paintings of houses, flowers, dogs, cats. Some paintings depicted monsters, but they had been crossed out. Ava stood before the crowd, her voice full of emotion. Today we don't just celebrate victory, we celebrate healing. Every child here, each one of us has fought a battle, and we've won. She invited a few children onto the stage. A boy who had once said nothing now told a story about a comic book hero fighting a shadow monster. A girl who had been afraid now sang a song about the sun, about flowers. Julian stood in the back watching Lily play with Liam. Lily wasn't just laughing, she was speaking, telling stories to Liam. Julian felt a warmth spread through his chest. He had once been a CEO, a successful man, but now he was a father. And that was the role he was most proud of. After the ceremony, Julian and Ava sat on the balcony of Ava's apartment, looking out at the city. The streetlights glittered like tiny diamonds. "We did it," Julian said, his voice filled with relief. "We've just begun," Ava said, her voice full of hope. "This is just the beginning. We have to keep fighting, for the children still trapped, for the children who still need us." Julian looked at her, and he knew that he would always be there fighting alongside her. Because Ava hadn't just saved his daughter, she had saved him. She had taught him that the greatest strength didn't lie in wealth or power, but in a voice that could change the world. Spring had returned to New York, bringing with it warm air and the first blossoms. But for Julian Stone, spring had truly begun long ago in a small park, when he heard the laughter of his daughter. That laughter was no longer a singular miracle, but part of a greater symphony created from the hundreds, the thousands of voices that had been healed. Together, Julian and Ava had built the New Hope Fund into a strong organization. They didn't just provide funding, they were directly involved in the activities. Julian used his management expertise to optimize the fund, ensuring that every penny was spent as efficiently as possible. Ava, with her understanding and compassion, had become the soul of the fund. She worked closely with expert schools and families, listening to their stories and finding the best ways to help. One of their first projects was to establish an arts and music center in Harlem, right next to the community center where Ava had once worked. It became a safe house, a sanctuary where children who had once been victims of Miller could come and express themselves through art. The walls, once stained by silence, were now covered with vibrant, colorful paintings created by children who had found their voices. Julian was no longer the man who only knew how to work. He had learned how to be a father. He often took Lily and Liam to the center, spending time with the children, drawing and playing music. One day, Lily drew a picture. It wasn't of skyscrapers or expensive cars. It was a picture of a family of three, Lily, Julian, and Ava. Lily used purple to draw a heart. Julian looked at the drawing, a warmth spreading through his chest. He knew that Lily had healed, not only because her voice had returned, but because her heart had been filled with love. While Lily and Liam were playing, Ava walked over to Julian. "Look at them," she said, her voice full of pride. "They're so happy." Julian took her hand. "Because of you, Ava, you gave them a second chance." "We gave them a second chance," Ava corrected. "We're not two Julian, we're a team." Their relationship had gone beyond gratitude. They had found in each other an understanding that no one else could share. Together, they had overcome challenges, fought the shadows of the past, and built a new future. They weren't rushing, but their love had grown naturally, like a flower that had found sunlight after a long winter. And then one day, Julian and Ava decided to go public with their relationship. The world was shocked. Blake Tennyson, the reporter who had once distorted Ava's story, wrote an article titled "A Great Love Story: Billionaire Julian Stone and the Woman Who Saved His Daughter." But Julian and Ava didn't care. They weren't doing this for the media. They were doing it because they had found each other. Their story had inspired many. Schools invited Ava to speak about the importance of listening and parents reached out to their fund for help. Ava's voice was no longer a solitary one. It was a symphony of voices that had been healed. The story ended with one more afternoon in the park where it all began. Julian, Ava, Lily, and Liam were sitting on a bench. Lily kept talking, telling Julian a story about the butterflies she had seen. Julian listened undistracted, no phone in hand. He had Lily and a radiant smile on his face. Liam, the mischievous boy, ran over and hugged Ava. "Mum, sing to me." Ava smiled and softly whistled a melody. It was no longer the melody of liberation, but the melody of peace. Julian took Ava's hand, feeling a tranquility spread through his chest. He had once been a successful CEO, but now he was a happy father, a man who had found love. Lily, hearing the melody, also smiled. She was no longer afraid. She was no longer silent. She had found her voice. Julian knew that their story wasn't just about healing. It was about forgiveness, about courage, and about finding hope even in the darkest of times. Lily's laughter hadn't just saved her, it had saved him and Ava. It was the voice of hope, a voice that would echo forever.